Hey guys, I'm Fat Buddy Cat, and this is my custom vintage mini bike. No matter what angle we look at this, I get a terrible reflection. There's a whole lot of bare cyborg meat here, guys. Basically, what we have going on is the added support for the pivot also acts as support for the chassis, as well as this cross section here. That chassis support is also for our jack shaft. I'm hoping that with all of this, we're not going to have to add anything here. So, let's get some bearings and see if they fit in the hole, I guess. I hit up Grey Goat at ombwarehouse.com. And the result? Well, I got all kinds of spacers, axles, nuts, bearings, jack shaft kits, pretty much whatever it's going to take to get this job done. First thing we're going to need is some bearings. So I got to figure out which ones. I got some off Amazon too, but I think these were for something else. I know this thing's upside down, but let's give this a good knock around for a minute. This torsion bar that I put between the two shocks is to allow the chassis to push down equally on the frame structure and through the shocks. Okay, that comes back to the swing arm, which we have slightly pinched in the back. We're going to use our spacers when we set our wheel to kind of torsion that back out. Where we put the supports on down here, this is carrying the brunt of everything. All right? It all returns right here. So this ladder structure and the rigidity of this swing arm removes the stress from this jack shaft. This jack shaft is just going to transfer to the back axle. So this alleviates a lot of the stress that we would be having on these bearings. Whether or not we're going to need some sort of chain tensioning system or an idler wheel, we'll find out. But that's what we're here to do today. So, I have some bearings, and I think these are the ones I'm going to use. Good thing too, because apparently these are the same thing. I'm just using a rubber mallet. Tap those suckers in. If at first you bang and you don't succeed, show her something shiny. Works? Every time. I just used my Dremel, polished up the insert so the bearing would slide right in. Sort of. Next, we're going to need a 5/8 shaft so we can start to figure this thing out. I think I have another one. We'll leave this one here for a reference right now. Oh yeah, I got a long one. I might have to manipulate this a little bit. You know what that means? I had already polished this jack shaft down. These bearings are a little bit snug. So, two hands and going in perfectly straight, it gets you there. Now, I just have to work it through to the other side and out. Once the shaft is fed through and it's just within the inside trace of the bearing, you can kind of hold it back with a few fingers, your hand, whatever you got going, and tap on the end of it with your rubber mallet. It'll go. I just went ahead and centered it, but once it's in there, it rolls nice. I took the shaft that I was using for my mock-up axle. I'm now going to use that as my mock-up shaft because I don't need all that extra length. I just wanted to try a few things out first and see where I was at. Now that I know I have a 420 sprocket, I'm either going to be using a 10 or a 9. So we'll mock this thing up with a 10 for now. Over on the bench, I have one of my wheels and tires, some sprockets, and some adapters. I'm going to have to mock something up so we can figure out where this chain's going to go. The first thing I'm going to have to put on is one of these hub adapters. Since this is purely for mock-up, I'm just looking for random hardware that fits. I just put a nut and bolt in 2 of the holes. 4 of them line up. The ring pattern for the universal sprockets match up with the outside holes. And again, just a nut and a bolt, some random hardware. At least we know that it's not going to fall off when we mock it up. We're not going to worry about the other hub yet. I'm just going to give this thing the shish kebab with that long shaft they have for now. It's 5/8. It'll fit. This is so cool. This is the first time that the wheel, the tire, and the sprocket has been on here so that I could spin it and see where everything lines up. Now obviously it's not tight, it can move around. But at our tightest point, we get plenty of clearance with our swing arm. And I think we should have no problem with our chain clearing any of this malarkey. Let's see if I have one long enough. Get a better look. This chain doesn't exactly make ends meet, but it's hanging on enough to show us that we clear everything perfectly. The wheel is just about in the center of the swing arm. We're all the way forward right now, and everything's drooping. When everything has tension, it's going to be away from absolutely everything. That's a really, really good thing. I still have to decide which side I want the sprocket to be on. Where this is completely custom, I could leave it on the left, or I could move it to the right. I think I might switch this around because we're upside down, and I'll leave it on the left side. Alright, I switched my sprocket around the other side by adding the second hub. Over here, the side with the valve stem, I'm going to put my brake rotor. I think I'll have more clearance for my stem that way. This is going to require a universal adapter. I have one on another sprocket. I'll just reuse it on this project. There's two sides on these universal adapters. I'm going to place this side inward like that. But before I put the hub on, we got to put our little brake rotor on. The brake rotor has to be spaced away from the hub, and that's done with a series of nuts. I think I've seen people use 3 of them, so we'll give that a shot. But I think it really depends on where your caliper is and how your adapter works out too. So this is going to be kind of a rough estimate at best. So the bolts I chose aren't really long enough, and I'm using these cap nuts that are slightly wider. I don't think 2 of them is the equivalent of 3 regular nuts. I could add a couple washers, I guess. Yeah, I'll go that route. I'll grab a couple washers. That way, I can at least attach the rotor, so when I'm trying to take measurements, nothing's just moving around on me. I'm also going to spin this around, because whatever I gain from setting it in there, I can shim with washers. And with it flipped over, it'll actually give me a better clearance with the head of my bolt. The caliper is only going to be sitting, at one point of this thing. So I'm going to flip that over. Yeah, I like that a lot better. Now, I'm just going to find another nut in the bolt, and attach it to the hub. I promise, once I have all the same hardware, this is going to look a whole lot cleaner. But at this point, we can spear it with the axle and stick it on the bike. See what we got. Alright, with the sprocket swapped around, so now it'll be on the left side of the bike. It looks really, really good. We'll be able to line up with our sprocket up here, and we know that we're going to miss everything in between. However, this disc brake is not going to work. We're already hitting the swing arm, and I'm not even sure if that's enough clearance between the adapter and the rotor itself. Even if it was, the only way it would work is like 2/3 back on the adjusters. What's the point, So, I didn't like the way this looked in the first place. We're going to find something else we can do. I'm also going to take the hub off. Alright, at this point, there's not a whole lot I can do with the wheels. or the hubs for that matter, or any of it, until I get the parts for the brakes. But in order to get any of that stuff on the bike, we're going to need axles. To measure up the back one, I'm keeping in mind that my swing arm is slightly out in the rear. It's about 1/4 inch. Alright? So the axle that I'm going to get is going to have a nut on each side, so that when I cut my even spacers, right, that go up to the hubs on my wheels, I can bring this thing together evenly. Alright, so that I could, grab an 1/8 inch over here and an 1/8 inch over here to make my 1/4. Center everything nice and tight. That way, I have constant tension on my axle. Up here in the front, it's a lot more straightforward. Up here, I'm just going to run a 10-inch bolt style axle. Alright, just like the stock bolt that came with this fork. It was a 12mm one. We'll get the same thing. We'll just switch to a 5/8 job. So the rear is going to be a 10-inch double threaded axle kit. The front is just going to be a 10-inch bolt. Both of them are going to have these big dookie custom cut spacers. For these wheels, I'm just going to have to get a whole bunch of the same hardware. I'm going to use the same nuts and bolts to hold my sprocket on that I'm going to use to hold the hub onto the rim itself. I'm probably going to need this other hub, but we're not going to be using this small rotor, because I have a new one on my list, as well as a bunch of other parts we're going to need. Because as always, it's a work in progress. Have a good night, guys. Thanks for watching. Now catch you on the next one.